So I think Arpit and Kevin did a good job of sort of describing some of the reasons behind DENT. And so just to kind of go a little bit further into what the vision for DENT is, why we think it makes sense to have a different network operating system and a different sort of hardware ecosystem compared to something like Sonic. I think maybe the easiest sort of way to start out is the question we always get is, okay, well, you know, how are DENT and Sonic different? How are they collaborating? You saw from what Arpit was talking about that we've started to bring SI support into DENT. So we're trying to find ways to harmonize the places where it makes sense, but the specific use cases that we're trying to target with DENT are different enough from where the Sonic community is focusing. And so it makes sense to have kind of a different vision. And the easiest way to think about that is that Sonic started as a data center project, a data center set of hardware and features, and is moving towards the enterprise and towards the edge. And DENT started at the edge, and it can grow into other applications and use cases. But by and large, the vision that we have for DENT is really about having a network operating system that didn't start for a data center, but started for a retail outlet or for a branch office or some sort of distributed enterprise edge deployment. I think we've already looked at this slide, so we can skip this one. That's no different. So DENT, one of the interesting things about the edge deployments is that you have to think about a much broader set of people that need to participate. And so unlike some of the enterprise use cases where some of the data center use cases where you have companies that have deep technical experience, they have kind of a lot of investment in different forms of infrastructure. If you're looking at an enterprise space, then you need to think about, okay, what end users are you working with? What system integrators are they partnering with to be able to implement their particular solutions? What are their own internal tech teams versus the SI's tech teams? And then how does that interact with the hardware supply chain so that you can have silicon vendors and you can have OEM hardware vendors and ODM hardware vendors? And so the goal for DENT from the very beginning isn't to just be about hardware or about a NOS, but to be about that ecosystem that Kevin was talking about and make sure that we create an open way for all of these different players to come together and collaborate on building something that allows enterprises and other edge use cases to be able to take advantage of the benefits of disaggregation and Linux-based networking. Next slide, please. So the guiding principles for DENT are really sort of shaped around the idea of starting at the edge. And so one of the most important things about the edge is that you need to have an ability to run on hardware that has minimum resources. And so in order to achieve the cost points that we were targeting, we tried to make sure that we could limit the amount of hardware abstractions, we could limit the amount of software infrastructure that runs on the boxes themselves, so that we can save the compute cycles and the memory for other applications that can run there as well and not just consume them by the base network operating system. And so to do that, we made a very conscious decision in the very beginning to use sort of the Linux fundamentals. So how do we leverage the networking components that are already in the kernel? How do we leverage architectural solutions like SI or like SwitchDev and really lean into the Linux way of doing things? Because at the end of the day, Linux can scale up and down, and it allowed us to be a lot more hardware optimized. And so kind of with that if you think about things in the Linux way, generally speaking, there's a lot of other hardware components that are treated in Linux not in a special way. And for some reason, the switch silicon has been different historically. And there's special SDKs and there's special ways that you have to think about it with special licensing. And so one of the things we wanted to do is say, how can we make switch silicon work just like every other hardware platform or every other hardware component in a Linux box? So you can have a way to download an open source driver and you can drive that switch silicon without having to worry about all of the backend. And then if you want to do something unique, just like in any other piece of hardware in Linux, there are ways that you can interact with that company that provided that hardware to enable advanced features. but you don't have to start there. You can drive the hardware just with a base build of Linux. And so that's been kind of one of the overriding goals. And then if we can do that, we can create a sort of unified way for the different hardware manufacturers and silicon vendors to be able to interface with an end user. And so from an AWS perspective, when we started DENT with our founding members, one of our main goals was to be able to create a software platform that worked at the edge that would allow us to work across multiple silicon vendors, hardware from multiple ODMs. At the time, there wasn't really an option out there. It was, you could either take this hardware from company A and run their software on it, or if you wanted to go switch to company B, then you had to go run their software. Sonic wasn't at the edge yet. There wasn't really options for that. And so that's really the goal behind DENT, is to create that sort of common platform that allows all of the different players in the supply chain to collaborate together so end users have choice and can take advantage of disaggregation. And that just really sort of expands then this use case for open networking and for disaggregated networking down to retail and down to enterprises and campus. And so how do we do that? So really the key objective to be able to do this is to try to standardize the way we interface with the hardware components that make a switch do what it does. And so at the end of the day, we started with switch dev. We're pulling SCI in so that we can have a standardized way of programming the ASIC and being able to manage the data plane. We use the standard Linux interfaces for then how we're going to go push routes down from user space into the kernel and down into the ASIC. We worked really hard to try to make sure from an architecture standpoint that we didn't create a sort of new way of thinking about how to interact with your switch. It's just Linux running on a box. So if you had a server that had a bunch of NICs and you wanted to do something, you can do the same thing now on the switch. And then we use either switch dev or SCI to make sure that those calls make it down to the ASIC and the switch does what it needs to do. And then that also allows us to support upstreaming those features into the kernel, into the other mainline projects that allow switches to operate just like any other Linux box. And so we're sort of looking at the rollout of DENT in multiple phases. And the first phase is really focused on this edge, distributed edge use case. And so you'll hear more from Sean later about how we're using it. But that's kind of where we're operating DENT right now is that distributed edge. But it doesn't have to stay there. Like I talked about in the beginning, DENT can move from the edge up. And so we have the opportunity to then look at other enterprise markets, look at other use cases. If there are uses where you want to be able to create a common platform across your edge deployment all the way back to, maybe a larger enterprise location or some sort of, enterprise data center, that's all possible because at the end of the day, the technology is there, but it was built to make sure it was optimized for sort of the low resource utilization that you need to make a cost optimized solution for the edge. And then we can kind of go from there into phases that will allow us to start to add in third-party support and bringing in sort of end-user support capabilities. Because again, in order to have an ecosystem, you need to have not just hardware players or software players, but also system integrators and support companies that can provide solutions around the whole thing. And I think that's one of the really unique aspects of DENT is that it's designed to be able to allow different people to participate based on what they do well. And so if you're a support company or if you're a system integrating company, you can come collaborate and participate in DENT and then go interact with end users that either are your customers already or are participating with DENT. And then that will kind of lead to the final phase, which is to create a DENT certification program, make sure that when an end user wants to interact with DENT, they can go find a partner that's gone through appropriate certification so that they can trust that the solution that they're going to get is one that will work for them the way the DENT objectives lay out. So I think that's it from me. So any questions at all on the vision of DENT? Okay, thank you very much. You have a question? It's working.
Okay, I'll just ask. Like, I think I'm loud enough.
It was working. It was okay. Yeah. It's on.
Okay, so this question is actually from some of the people who visited in the DENT booth yesterday. So this is about going ahead. How do you see, like for example, for data centers, it will be a dedicated operating system, and for edge, it will be a dedicated operating system, or there'll be a harmonization. There'll be a single solution for both the use cases, kind of thing. What is your prediction going ahead, kind of?
Yeah, so I don't think there will be one sort of NOS. If you think about the one of the last slides that Kevin shared, if you think about this sort of modular approach to open networking now, it doesn't really make sense to standardize the entire package, like that entire column, because each use case is going to be different. And so I think what we'll end up with is hopefully the things that operate at the lowest level and interact with the hardware, that will standardize. And so there's a lot of momentum behind Psi at this point. And so as we bring Psi into DENT, we'll be able to say, okay, great. If you want to program an ASIC in Linux, you can use Psi. And then now whatever sort of NOS layer you want to add on top of that can work with Psi. And the way it works with Psi might be different. Like the way that DENT will use Psi is different than the way Sonic uses Psi because of some of the objectives that we have. So again, we're focused on keeping the overhead of the operating system as small as possible so that we can do one of two things. Either optimize the hardware in the box so that we can make it as cheap as possible and as simple as possible and as highly available as possible in a retail location where you don't have technical staff that can go out and repair it if it breaks. You need it to just run. Or so that if you do put more compute resources there, you can use it for other things. Because at the end of the day, in a data center, you might have sort of workload-specific hardware that runs one workload. But at the edge, you don't. At the edge, you end up in a scenario where you want to have a converged hardware platform that allows you to run multiple workloads on it. And so if we can keep the operating system overhead as low as possible and save those resources for applications, then we start to open up really interesting possibilities at the edge. So I think because of that NOS layer, I don't see harmonizing. I think we'll continue to see a difference in what is needed for the data center versus what's needed for the edge. But I think as much as possible underneath that, if we can make it so that the silicon vendors and the hardware manufacturers don't have to think about the NOS. They can just do sort of work to enable that hardware in Linux. And then from there, it's the end user can pick. If their use case is more aligned with sort of how Sonic works, great. If it's more aligned with how DENT works, great. Then we can kind of use that as you go. And the hardware may be more optimized. It might be that there's a switch that doesn't run super well with Sonic because it doesn't have the resources that is needed. But that's sort of a choice that can happen above that sort of base hardware layer, and it gives the users the appropriate choice. So I think that's where I see it going. Hopefully, we won't have a lot of fragmentation down at that hardware layer, though.
True. Thanks.
Yep.
And yeah, quite a few people. The comment was they found especially the one person they run a campus network thing. So the hardware that they have from multiple vendors. They have the hardware. They found Sonic to be very heavy for their use cases. So their question was, can we directly use DENT today, and can you support as a project?
Yep.
The answer is yes, of course.
Absolutely. That's the whole goal. And I mean, that was from an end user perspective, that's exactly what we looked at is, okay, if we were going to run Sonic at the day when we started DENT really didn't have enterprise features anyways. But today, if you're going to run Sonic at a retail store or at a campus or some sort of small branch office, the hardware you need is going to be very different than the hardware you need for running DENT. And so if that's what's appropriate for you and for some reason that aligns with infrastructure you have somewhere else, great. That's totally an option that you can take as an end user. But if it's not, then I think that's where DENT will allow you to do either more with the hardware that you have or get less expensive, more cost-optimized hardware. And the other big thing, I think, Kevin mentioned it. So one of the other things we've started to do with DENT is, I don't really think of DENT OS as a network operating system as much anymore. I think of it as a sort of edge infrastructure operating system because we can run DENT, and we do run DENT now. I think Sean will talk about it more, but we run DENT on things that aren't switches. And that's given us the the ability to standardize the way we manage the devices that we push to the edge, the way we secure those devices. And that's something we could never do with Sonic either. And so that, at the end of the day, really just becomes about choice. And so if for that particular use case, that would absolutely be a great place to use DENT.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Jason.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.